O Cbum não ganhou em todas as poses do Ramon não. O Ramon ganhou em uma das poses e mostrou que mesmo que a vitória dele tenha sido unânime pelos árbitros, isso não significa que todas as poses feitas por ambos o Cbum tenha levado. Não. Isso, ganhar de forma unânime significa que todos os árbitros deram o primeiro lugar pro Chris Bumstead, mas isso não significa que ele ganhou todas as poses, conforme a gente vai ver agora no vídeo do pronunciamento de nada mais nada menos do vice-presidente da NPC, que é o Tyler Manion. Ele soltou aí um pronunciamento a respeito dessa disputa entre ambos, entre o Ramon e o Chris Bumstead, e ele mostrou ponto a ponto dessa disputa, mostrou uma visão dele como árbitro dessa disputa, e vamos dar uma olhada aqui para ver o que ele disse e eu vou comentar sobre isso, beleza? Lembrando que esse aqui é um vídeo no Notícias Maromba. Se você quer ver esse vídeo completo, vai lá, dá uma olhada, é um canal muito bom. Para quem é da maromba aí, eu aconselho demais seguir esse canal, porque ele é incrível, ele tem diversas notícias aí do mundo maromba. Vamos dar uma olhada aqui nesse pronunciamento do Tyler Manion.
Hi everyone, Tyler Manion here, NPC and IFBB Pro League Vice President. This will be the Mr. Olympia recap for Classic Physique. We're going to go through pose by pose with Chris and Ramon, and then we'll review third, fourth, and fifth place. So first up is the front double bicep pose. I think Ramon has improved this pose a lot, even just from last year, even though it was still Chris.
Lembrando então que aqui, conforme ele está dizendo, nessa pose duplo de frente, o Cbum ainda levou com uma margem em cima do Ramon. E lembrando que, como ele disse aqui, essa margem entre os dois diminuiu muito devido à evolução que o Ramon teve, tanto no físico quanto de pose em si.
Took it by a decent margin. This margin shrunk a lot, due to, one, improvements from Ramon, of course, but also Chris wasn't as good, did not bring as good of a package in as last year, in my opinion. So in the front double bicep pose, we see Ramon is now hitting it differently. I think this is definitely better than what he was doing before. He's showing off more width and more taper. Ramon obviously has great arms. He has great forearms and arms. He also brought up his quads as well. You see nice detail, nice fullness, and even the width, the space that they're taking up on stage, I think has come up. Now, Chris has a great front double bicep pose. His arms are solid, not amazing, probably the weakest point for him in this pose, but his width and...
Ele disse que a respeito do braço, né, do Ramon, dos antebraços dele, que é muito bom, o V-shaper do Ramon, ele é sim melhor devido à cintura mais fina, a lateralização dos quadríceps, que ele melhorou muito. Os braços do Ramon também são muito bons, mas o Chris Bumstead ganha na largura. E ele disse que a respeito dos braços do Chris Bumstead, que na minha opinião são um dos melhores braços aí da Classic Physique, mas se levar em consideração todo o corpo, todo o físico do Chris Bumstead, os braços ficam um pouco para trás. Lembrando que ele não disse que são ruins, apenas não acompanha o restante do físico.
And his taper into his waist is extremely, extremely strong. Now, his legs are still very good. However, I feel like they were just a touch down from what they were last year from the front. When you look through this pose, when it comes to looking at the arms, Ramon has better arms. Then you go down into the torso. Chris has a wider and better taper. So Chris wins the taper. And then their legs are actually extremely close now in size and in detail. And their overall conditioning was, I think, very, very close, basically almost even. So this pose is actually way, way closer than it's ever been. However, I would still lean giving it towards Chris because just the width and, the taper into that waist, and he's still showing detail through the arms, through the legs with great conditioning. Size-wise, they look very, very similar in size now, but Chris takes this pose for me. He edges it out.
Essa pose então acaba indo para o Chris Bumstead porque ele mostra uma largura melhor, ele posa um pouquinho mais proporcional, um pouquinho mais, facilita mais para ele, mais positivo para o físico dele posar dessa forma, porque ele cria um V-shaper mais bonito Ele tem pernas que ele, pelo que o Tyler Man disse ali, parecidas, as pernas tanto do Ramon quanto do Chris Bumstead são muito boas e são pernas que estão mais parecidas. A largura de ambos também está mais parecida agora, mas o Chris Bumstead ainda acaba vencendo por criar uma proporção, uma desproporção, né, no caso, maior entre cintura escapular e cintura pélvica e também por ter mais detalhamento geral no físico.
Next up is the side chest pose. So Chris has an extremely dominant side chest pose. It's definitely by far the best side chest pose in Classic. Chris has great detail and thickness in his chest, in his arms, in his shoulders.
Essa é incontestável, essa pose vai pro Chris Bumstead.
Great development. Then Ramon improved this pose. I think he improved this pose a good bit. His chest looks thicker. He could still be hitting it better. He's sacrificing his width by pushing his chest across too much and raising his shoulder up too much. But still, he has...
Aqui o Ramon pode sim melhorar essa pose, mostrar um pouco mais de largura, igual o Chris Bumstead faz, mas pelo nível de detalhamento, o Chris ainda sai muito na frente.
Great arms and shoulders. The chest got thicker, and his side leg is solid, but next to Chris's side leg, it just really doesn't compare. So in this pose, it is a dominant pose for Chris, and he clearly takes this to go up 2-0. Next up is the back double bicep pose.
Então as duas primeiras poses acabou indo por Chris Bumstead com uma certa sobra nessa pose de peitoral maior lado. Agora a gente vai ver o duplo bíceps de costas. Fiquem de olho nessa pose.
For Chris in his back double, he has good size to his arms that we're viewing from the back, good detail. Same with his shoulders. You go into his back. He is very wide still in this back double bicep. Now he could still use a little bit more density and detail to his back here to really make it pop. Lower body wise, he has great hamstrings, good leg width from the back, and his conditioning was very good. However, I think it was still a touch off what it was last year. And now we'll compare to Ramon. Ramon has, again, good arms and shoulders with good detail through them. Now going into his back, he still exhibits a very nice V-taper, but the details and depth to his back, when he was doing his back double bicep, his back was really, really popping on stage. Now we move into the lower body, and from the back here, I think while we were posing them when they were right in front of us, Ramon's conditioning from the back and the back leg here was actually sticking out a little bit more than Chris's, as he was just a little bit drier back here. So while I think he also exhibits good leg width and detail, from this back double bicep, Chris has the edge a little bit size-wise on the lower body, but with conditioning, Ramon had the edge here. Then when we move up to the upper body, Chris was a little bit wider, but Ramon's back was more detailed, and it was just popping more. And with similar arms and shoulders here and how they, flow and match into their physiques, this was a really, really close pose. But in my opinion, this was the first time that I gave Ramon the edge in this pose.
O que ele disse ali foi que essa pose foi do Ramon Dino, por ter mais detalhamento na dorsal, ainda que em termos de largura, o Chris Bumstead acaba levando. Detalhamento do Ramon Dino é superior, ele chegou num condicionamento melhor do que o Chris Bumstead, ainda que tenha sido mais ou menos igual o condicionamento dos dois. O Ramon Dino superou o Chris Bumstead, que inclusive, essa é a segunda vez que o Tyler fala isso, o Chris Bumstead chegou pior nesse ano do que o ano passado, tanto em termos de condicionamento, em termos de quadríceps também, que na pose anterior ele citou, na primeira pose ele citou isso, e essa pose foi do Ramon Dino, foi muito pareio, mas essa pose acabou saindo para ele.
To give him the back double bicep to make it 2-1. Next up is the ab and thigh pose. So for the ab and thigh, both these guys hit the vacuum first, and then they sometimes blow out the abs and hit, crunch down on the abs. The vacuum, when they're both hitting the vacuum.
Essa pose do vácuo do Chris Bumstead é impossível pegar.
The ab and thigh here, that taper into the really, really small waist really gives him an edge. Again, their quads and the way they're positioning them, I think, are very, very similar in size, in fullness, and in detail. Ramon still has a nice taper. I mean, this improved a lot from the last year. His taper in this pose, when he hit the vacuum last year, it really wasn't, good pose for him at all. So in the vacuum, because of the taper and everything else being similar, with whether it's conditioning and muscle size and thickness, I give the edge to Chris.
Essa pose também vai para o Chris Bumstead, mas repara bem que o Tyler tá falando dos dois. Ele cita que o Ramon melhorou em todos os aspectos do ano passado, todos. O Ramon teve sim um aprimoramento. Já o Chris Bumstead, ele só diz que o Chris Bumstead ou tá igual ou tá pior do que ele estava no ano passado. Então assim, se o Chris não melhorar nesse ano agora, eu posso dar 100% de certeza de que esse título vai passar para as mãos do Ramon.
Then, when even they are blowing out with the abs and they're crunching down, Ramon, when he crunches down, you see his obliques come out a little bit more, which makes his waist a little bit wider. However, his abs are very deep. Now with Chris, he still has a really, really nice taper, but his abs aren't as deep as Ramon's. So again, you can see why this would be a really, really close pose. I still would give it to Chris, and it obviously has to do with the width.
Esse foi o ponto dele. A questão do abdômen, o Ramon acaba levando ainda, porém em termos do V-taper e da largura, o Chris Bumstead acaba criando um aspecto mais bonito no físico e acaba levando essa pose também.
And that could possibly change some things in this pose and other poses. But now it's 3-1 Chris. Last up is favorite classic pose. Now here, I think Chris has a really, really good favorite classic pose. He hits the one hand on hip, one arm up bicep pose where he's pulling a vacuum. He really, really shows off his taper here because basically on one side he's hitting a lat spread, on the other side he's hitting a front double bicep. You see thickness throughout his arms, his shoulders, his chest with crazy taper, and then obviously his lower body is great. This favorite classic pose is very, very hard to compete with. Now, Ramon makes a big mistake here because he hits multiple favorite classic poses, and really each one, I don't think he's picking a pose that is showing off his physique in the best possible way. In this pose, you want to display your physique at its strongest.
Tá aqui o maior erro do Ramon Dino, que o Tyler citou. O Ramon não consegue escolher uma pose clássica que de fato evidencie pontos fortes do físico dele, igual o Chris Bumstead faz com essa pose, mostrando o V-taper extremamente potente dele, e o Ramon Dino acaba não fazendo isso, então nessa pose o Ramon não se sai muito bem.
The fewest weak points and the most strengths to show off to the judges. That's what makes this such a unique pose. He was hitting a side tricep variation. He would go into a twisting back shot, but he would go into a twisting back shot when Chris would go into his twisting back shot. So he's really playing into Chris's game here on stage. Chris knows to play to his strengths. He's not going to hit a pose that shows off his weaknesses or displays really any weaknesses here, while Ramon really hasn't found a classic pose that works really well for his physique. So when scoring this pose, I think this is another very dominant pose for Chris. That ends up making it 4 poses to 1. Right now at this show, there were 3 poses that I think were very, very close, which were the front double, the back double, and the ab and thigh. And now 2 poses that were really dominant for Chris still, which is the side chest and the favorite classic pose. For Ramon going forward, if he can add, which he did from last year to this year, but if he can add even more width to his physique while really keeping the waist small and doing everything else that he did from last year to this year and repeating that again, he can challenge him in the 2 poses that he lost and also try to keep getting ahead in the back double bicep.
O ponto aqui é o seguinte, o maior erro do Ramon foi jogar o jogo do Chris Bumstead em cima do palco. O Chris ele posa de uma forma com que ele esconda os pontos fracos e evidencie os pontos fortes. O que o Ramon precisa fazer para que ele consiga superar? Só do momento que ele pisa no palco, ele já tem que chegar com a mente de campeão. Ele tem que chegar fazendo o jogo dele, não o jogo do Chris Bumstead. Enquanto ele não encontrar como exemplo ali uma pose clássica que combine bem com o físico dele, ele vai acabar jogando o jogo do Chris Bumstead e vai chegar já com a mentalidade em segundo lugar. Ele não está chegando com a mentalidade como ser campeão, algo que ele melhorou muito do ano passado para esse ano, mas ainda pode melhorar muito para o ano que vem. E eu tenho certeza que quando ele fizer essas melhorias no físico dele, acabou. Ele vai criar uma dinastia na Classic Physique. O que você acha? Você concorda comigo? Deixa aqui nos comentários a sua opinião. Se você gostou desse vídeo, deixa o like. Se não gostou, deixa o dislike. Valeu, esse foi o vídeo de hoje. Valeu, um abraço e até mais.